than Indians often because there's so many fights taking place. But look at the Sundarban. I mean, we're next to where we are. It's not just Bonovivi. They worship everything there. It's a tough life, but they realize that nature is the source of life still. And the pandemic has, if nothing else, reminded us that we are not equal to a battle that we declare on the biosphere. So I think, yes, Indians do look at nature, whether or not the people who manage our policies and our resources accept and understand that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment is another matter altogether.
Oh, that's quite brilliant. But Bittu, when we talk about humanity, we as humans looking at nature, do we as Indians ever looked at nature which as an entity that we should work with, not as an entity we can either milk or use for getting money out of, or getting stuff out of, getting forest produce out of?
Yeah, I think, let me just add, I mean, my reading of what little of Vedas and Upanishads has suggested to me that those scriptures, ancient scriptures actually talked about nature as a provider. I mean, we've always looked at nature as something that will heal us with medicines or provide us with food. We really don't look at nature, never been told to look at nature as from a scientific point of view, bent of mind, with any curiosity, let's say. I mean, we've been conditioned to exploit nature and look at nature as a provider. So, whereas I think what this subject is nature a little different? Should we look at nature differently? And that's what we want to know.
I would, yes, go on, Bikram.
But go ahead.
No, I would agree with you. I mean, I say that today things have changed. But if you go around this country, and Bikram and I and you, we've gone around far corners of this country. You can't go to a river without seeing a temple there. I'm not talking of Amarkantak or some huge temple. I'm talking about a collection of rocks. The Narmada that everybody worships so much, the original source is in the Kanha, is the Halon and Banjar rivers, the sources of those. So I believe we did, as you correctly said, but instead of after independence, instead of exporting our attitudes to nature to the outside world, we began to import false ambition. And I think that's the point you're making, which I have to agree with you, that we have lost our way. At this moment in time, we have lost our way, and the pandemic and climate change are coming merely as messagings that, look, nature won't give you any judgments. You're a good boy, Bikram, Sumit and Bittu, you really write about nature, and it will just give consequences. First warnings and then consequences. And where you're sitting in Calcutta, quite frankly, without the Sundarbans, I don't know whether Calcutta would be a viable city. This is where I think young people are beginning to go back and looking at nature differently as a protector, as a provider, as a source of life. It's a long journey, Sumit. You asked the right question, and I agree with you that we lost.
I was kind of shocked today when I was driving up. I met an old driver of mine who lives in UP. And I said, so how was the pandemic? I mean, I thought I'd ask him this question, man close to nature. How was the pandemic and how did it change your attitude towards things around you? So he said everything was fine. It wasn't so bad. And I mean, the crops came and then the river was there. So I said, what was the special about the river? He said the bodies went down the river.
Yeah, the Hooghly.
So
I tell you.
So look at the way he's looking at nature.
Yeah.
It's a provider of services, right?
Taking bodies downstream.
Yes, he said बहुत deaths हुआ हमारा इधर, लेकिन नदी तो सब लेके चला गया, हमको तो कुछ नहीं हुआ.
I understand what you're saying.
Even in the earlier days, in the times of, let's say, the Brits, the naming of birds or the naming of animals was done starting with those that were edible.
Hmm.
rather than, general naming of birds. The books were written about game birds, game animals, and then it's kind of spread. So animals, birds, plants have always been seen as a food source. And has it really changed? Can we go and say that, how beautiful? Is it just for the sake of saying how beautiful that, can we get along with that? Or do we go and say that, look, we can actually harvest this? Harvest the water hyacinth, or can we not harvest the water hyacinth? Are we looking at economic? Are we putting an economic price to almost everything, including the forest?
Yeah,
Bikram, yeah.
Absolutely, Bikram. Very
Yeah.
correct. And what really worries me about this whole question is a lack of curiosity. I was just telling Bikram this story. All of us here possibly are familiar with a local fish called bhetki, right? A lot of us have had bhetki. If some of us have actually gone to the bazaars to buy the fish, and some may have even been told this bhetki is special, it is from the river, right? And you would have believed that man, he's been selling you bhetki for years. Has it ever crossed anybody's mind here why all the bhetki that you ever see being cut in front of you never carries eggs? Have you ever seen a bhetki with eggs? No. I mean, let's look at the eggs. I don't know the other answer. Has anyone seen a bhetki with eggs? The bhetki that you buy in Calcutta can't have eggs. It can't be from the sea because it is bhetki which is farmed. The life cycle of the fish is it grows to maturity in brackish water, like in the Sundarbans, rivers, but it has to come to fresh water to lay eggs. How does it come to fresh water? It comes to fresh water when floods. It comes into ponds, the spawn grow to adulthood without changing sex in ponds. Then when it grows to adulthood, it actually again meets the flood and goes back into the brackish water rivers. And there it grows, changes sex, carries either eggs or sperm, and then lays eggs back in this cycle. So any bhetki that you buy will always end up eggless. And if you say the whole point which I wanted to make was not this. This is a story. The point is, I have made it a habit to go to fishmongers in every market that I visit, and I say, have you ever seen bhetki with eggs? And they would look at me, and 20-year-old fish seller, 30-year-old fish seller, father fish seller, grandfather, na dada, bhetki mache to deem hoy na, are deem hoy na ki, So, but what I wanted to just make an example is a lack of curiosity for generations, hundreds of people whose whole livelihood revolves around what he sells, doesn't have the curiosity to know that this thing's life cycle is such that it cannot have eggs when he sells them. If you ever get one with eggs, three cheers, special feast, because that is a brackish water fish which will taste much better and it will never be small.
Sumit, I think what we have to do is that we have to go and follow Malvika's diktat and answer the questions of today's program, which is how has the pandemic affected tourism and wildlife tourism in particular? Both Sumit and I have been discussing this for a few days to say that tourism or wildlife trade in India has actually got a spurt. There have been more killings of wild animals during the pandemic than saying that the animals have got a much needed respite by aiming to resuscitate, regenerate. Nobody's watching them, nobody's hassling them. And the reason for that is pretty simple, is that people are going back without any food, without any work. without anything to do. So one of the ways of earning food, earning money is to go and kill animals. What is your take on that, Bittu?
Bikram, you're absolutely right about this one thing. During the pandemic, there are two factors have come in. First, there was massive migration away from the cities where there was livelihoods, where there were jobs, and they've gone back to villages where there was very little sustenance, not just food, but no way to live and nothing to do. So to a large extent, they became victim to poachers and people like this. Well, there's a much deeper connection between the pandemic and the wild species we're talking about, and we'll come even to the business of tourism. There is a report called the Dasgupta report, the Dasgupta review, and it absolutely squarely points out with evidence that the pandemic was actually caused to a very large extent by the illegal wildlife trade. And how did this happen? If you look at AIDS, SARS, MERS, swine flu, bird flu, mad cow disease, the Casanova monkey disease, all these came from wild animals to humans. How? Because we began to eat them, trade in them, mix them up, grind them. Sometimes now, in this case, this particular COVID-19 pandemic, what has happened is that it definitely did originate in a bat. Once it originated from the bat, the suspicion is that it went into a pangolin, which is the largest traded mammal in the world today. From there, it did go to Wuhan, and we don't know. Forget conspiracy theories and everything else. But the fact is now the Dasgupta review has told us, and the IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, it tells us in no uncertain terms that if we want to stop the next pandemic, then the only thing we can really do is to restore ecosystems and stop allowing creatures with their viruses to come into our systems. It's it's counterintuitive sometimes, but the hard fact is that this pandemic is merely a small, tiny pinprick of a warning compared to what is waiting for us. And no, India has not understood it, nor has America, nor has England, nor has any of these other countries. They continue to exploit resources in ways that are unsustainable. And simultaneously, our immune systems are damaged by chemicals. And the combination is like a left-right blow in a boxing match. Frankly, we don't have much of a chance of surviving this unless we wake up. And the connections between climate change, the pandemic, and the loss of biodiversity is complete. I don't know if that completely answers your question, but this is what it is. And young people do understand. The elders, I'm afraid, are lagging far behind, the ones with their hands on the wheel.
I have a question related to this. Do Indians really associate, Indians by and large, associate the pandemic with destruction of nature, that the more we destroy nature, more we destroy the habitats, more we get wild animals closer to humans, the more we expose ourselves to the risk of another pandemic of a different nature. Do Indians, by and large, the man on the street, understand this linkage?
No. He doesn't understand the linkage of this, and he doesn't understand the linkage of why the floods are taking place. Most Indians, why most Indians? Most people across the world don't understand the connection between digging coal out, sending it up into the atmosphere, causing climate change and causing cyclones and disease. This pandemic is a part and parcel of the climate crises that we have. They're the same reason. And I understand exactly what you're asking, Sumit. I can only say in a simple two-letter answer, no, they don't understand.
So is this a failure of the education system, of the way we've been brought up, of the way we have, there is a little bit of nature in the superstition that we were, was imposed on us by our grandmothers, and, don't cut your nails at night because there was no light. So there is some superstition in what food not to eat when, which is an understanding of nature. I mean, you don't eat a particular type of fish during summer, because actually what happens is the water drains out and this fish has worms in it. So there is a cultural taboo about that. So that is the only sort of nature training that we ever had as children. But when you are saying that worldwide there is a lack of understanding, so do you want to say that there is a way that the method in which we have been brought to understand the world around us is wrong? That we should not concentrate on astrophysics, but a little bit more on what happens really around us?
I would say that, as I said, Gandhiji wanted us to go one way and Nehru wanted us to go the other way. Well, we decided to import the equivalent of false ambition, which treated nature as resources. So there is just absolutely no doubt about one simple fact. We have emptied our larder, and from the larder have not only come out food, viruses have come out of there. There are diseases in wait inside, not only in faraway Antarctica, up in the Himalaya. All those glaciers, who knows what viruses are going to be unleashed. So yes, we were made to unlearn what we learned, and that was to our peril. We've discovered it now. I don't think that it's going to be easy to go back, but nature is going to force us to do many things, and it's asking us to kneel in worship and prayer and appreciation. We're not listening, and it will probably make us kneel in subjugation in the not too distant future.
I'm going to try, sorry, Sumit, I'm going to try and get back this conversation back on the original track, which was how has the pandemic affected tourism in India, particularly wildlife tourism? Was wildlife tourism always only a tiger tourism? And has the pandemic done anything to it? Or does it continue as the same way as it did before? Sumit?
No, I mean, I think tourism would take a hit in any case. Tourism would take a hit, has taken a hit in the first place because we couldn't travel. Tourism will now take a bigger hit because we got to get back to our work first before we find time, all holidays, or make enough money to make it worthwhile to go out again. So tourism, this is the sort of tourism we talk about, nature tourism, is going to wait for some time. And whether that wait will affect the industry is something that you are in a much better position to answer, Bikram.
Bittu, what do you think? Do you think that it has...
Yeah, go on, Bikram.
No, do you really think that it has changed?
I personally think, Bikram, that Sumit was right. The hit that tourism took was because there was no way for tourists to get to where they wanted to go. At this moment in time, if you want to go to Kana or Bandhavgarh or Taroba or any of these places, you have to wait for a month and a half to get bookings. So yes, there is a change. There's less foreign overseas tourism and there's much more domestic tourism, and it's taking place in ways that are actually impacting the forest even more because there is an indiscipline that's crept in. And I think that the change will come, Bikram. I don't think tourism will be wiped out by the pandemic, particularly because most of the wildlife tourism is outdoors, as different to theaters and things like this. So if people want an escape, they'll probably go outdoors, but they will go to some of the lesser places, Bikram. There's a huge opportunity here for people to earn livelihoods in smaller villages, and next to our protected areas and forests like Sundarbans.
But I make a case here. I mean, these are all things that we hear about, but there is a live case in front of us, Sri Lanka. Yeah. The country is dying because of tourism, and we talk about tourism, I mean, being still viable. It's dying. Wildlife tourism is a large part of its tourism. And that is completely crippled. I mean, we don't understand it because in India, we don't have tourism in that scale, where it's as a part of our economy overall. So I think tourism has taken a big hit, and it's not going to get back on its feet and running very fast. I mean, Bikram should also take this question.
Let's look at a place like Sundarbans. 90% of the people who went to Sundarbans didn't go to look at the wildlife, certainly didn't look at the tigers. They went there because it was an odd place. It was full of water instead of roads, instead of sands. Has that kind of tourism changed at all? Are people more worried about what's going to happen? Are people more worried that, when I sit in the city, I've got more chances of getting a pandemic? I have less chances of getting it in Sundarbans. Is any of that kind of uh, attitudes taking place, sensibilities taking place?
I think the one sensibility that is taking a lot of tourism of the nature that you're talking about is young people with children. They are far more concerned about their child getting back to school now, and the school is not giving any holidays now, so there is no holiday. So I mean that's a big factor, education and the lack of it during the pandemic, and that change may affect tourism.
No, of course it will. But what does this mean? What do we do with, let's say, the guides who had built up a certain amount of expertise over the years? They had a certain amount of money-making abilities. Those opportunities are going, especially in the small places. So unless we think out of the box, what are we going to do to help them? Or is it a time now to say that, look, let's try and educate them? If they're a guide, let's go and try and tell them that there are more things to a forest than just a tiger. Can we tell them about mammals? Can we tell them about birds? Can we tell them about plants? Which is something which we should have done about 10 years back.
Bikram, there's no doubt about the veracity of what you're saying here. The thing is, I'm saying again that tourism, if you look at tourism, it has all conglomerated in the few places where the tiger exists. Both of you are the people who I would consider my gurus as far as the avians are concerned. The way I see it is, number one, there's going to be many more domestic people traveling than overseas visitors on to the wildernesses of India, and they will not go to the large wildernesses only. They'll go to the smaller ones. You have the important bird areas, you have the IBC and the International Bird Conservation Network. You have all these places, and there are communities living next to them. And yes, those people, the more, I think birding is going to replace tiger watching in the next 10 years as the prime driver of tourism in India. Let me put it like that. Whether it's in urban India, right now where I sit, I'm sitting in Bombay and talking to you. But less than 30 minutes from where I am, there are 60,000 flamingos. There are over 4 million birds in the Thane Creek. Those birds are hardly ever even appreciated or understood or seen, but in the recent 2 years, the number of people that have begun to visit these birds and talk about them and write about them on social media, these are kids who may be 15, 14, 16, 18, 20, and it's spreading. I would not look at the pandemic as being something that is negative to tourism per se. I would say that the pandemic's real lessons should be one where we can appreciate the fact that local communities, if they benefit from the return of biodiversity, tourism will definitely go up. In the process, the pandemic itself, the solution to the pandemic will also emerge from there. It's conjoined. Tourism can be a conservation tool. It is happening. We've been working, Bikram, in the Sundarbans. We have Joydeep and Suchandra Kundu who've been working there with Sher. We have the Wildlife Protection Society of India. We have Belinda Wright. We have so many people who have been working here. I can tell you without a shadow of doubt, the tourism that used to grab people and shove them into large spaces in confined places for the next 5 years is going to see a dip. And the tourism that allows people to go out and breathe fresh air is going to find a rise. It's whether we have the wisdom to enable this tourism. And I'll end by saying we have been working for 6 years now on something called Cocoon Conservancy Sanctuary, community-owned, community-operated nature conservancies, where the rules that apply, Bikram, if you go to Corbett now, you won't even if you have to go and use the loo, you can't go and use the loo because you can't get out of the Jeep. So you need to be able to be somewhere where you can actually experience nature, smell nature, hear nature, touch the mud, wade in a river. That can only happen outside our protected areas. And I think that is the future of tourism, where communities become the primary beneficiary and places which are less discovered. I haven't visited Ranthambore for I don't know how many years now, nor Kana, nor Corbett. I don't want to go to meet more people. I want to go there to commune with nature. And that, I think, is the big opportunity. And I believe that tourism will add not only to the experience and to conservation, but it'll also add to our revenue as a prime GDP promoter and a livelihood promoter for India.
Okay, before I think we move out of the tourism, and I'll still go back to both of you with this question. Really, I mean, after all these discussions, do we really think that Indians are looking at nature differently post the impact of COVID, or are we incapable of differentiating what COVID has done to us or are done to nature, or how nature has been impacted because of COVID? I mean, this was the subject of our discussion, and I'd like to drag you back to that. I'll start with you, Bittu, first.
I think that people have definitely looked at nature with a little more respect. I think that I can take a medicine and cure everything idea, and I can do whatever I like has gone. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly made us feel more vulnerable. And I'm thinking of David Quammen's book, The Monsters of God. The reason that the British that Bikram talked about came here and shot everything in sight. First, they shot all the carnivores. In America, they're still doing that. In Europe, they're still doing that. They wanted to kill anything that threatens them. Now, I think the younger generation is growing up to see that if we declare war on nature, we are unequal to the response that we will get. I'm talking now about 12 to 17 and 18-year-olds. My generation, I'm 74 years old. I think I've almost given up on us, because for that generation, my answer to you is, I completely agree with you. My entire life is now devoted to the younger people, and we are in the departure lounge, Bikram. The arrival lounge has to be made ready, and I promise you that the younger generation is ready. It doesn't mean urban. I'm talking about village kids. We are in 45 villages in Ranthambore. We are going out into Pench. We're beginning to work with you, Bikram, and going out into villages in the Sundarbans and with Joydeep and Suchandra. We are definitely going to see a younger generation that is more responsive to nature, and the pandemic has definitely influenced them.
That's great to hear. And last word from Bikram on the subject.
I really hope, Bittu, you are correct, that the future really lies in the hands of the children, and children are picking up the baton and running. But having said that, is the progress fast enough? Or are we losing more than we are even stabilizing? That is what I think we are going a little wrong.
Bikram, have faith. There's a word called homeostasis. Like when you get a temperature at 101, your body is bringing it down whether you take a crocin or not. The whole planet is meant to bring back things to normal. And I can assure you that the attitude of people towards wildlife, birds that came closer, tigers that came right into Ramnagar, I'm honestly telling you that our awareness of our dependence upon nature has gone up. Our awe of something we cannot fight has gone up. And I do think, I mean, call me an optimist or call me a fool. I do think that when my generation is phased out, we have a crop of people who have understood that the river doesn't run because the rain falls. The river runs because the rain falls on forests that sponge it, put it into aquifers. The aquifers feed the rivers. When the rain falls, those rivers feed our farms, the farms feed us. Cradle to cradle is what we brought up a whole generation to understand. Villagers already knew this. They always respected this. It's us people in the urban areas that need considerable.
Are we talking about
can't hear you,
emotion, or are we talking without a lack of any kind of scientific data to base our things?
There is a little bit of emotion and there is a lack of data, but I think overall I agree with Bittu that the newer generation understand the dynamics better than our generation. But I think we are closing in on the time.
I think we should just open it to the audience.
Yeah, I just want to conclude with two small observations. I think there is a bigger thing than just nature and how we are reacting. Nature also is reacting to something. Nature is reacting to a change which even nature can't handle, and that is climate change. And climate change will change the way we look at nature, and how nature itself responds to climate change will dictate what tomorrow holds for us. So just understanding nature, just reacting to changes in nature is not good enough. We must understand and prevent climate change to the extent that is within our capabilities and abilities. But bigger than that, I think we should vote to make our governments understand that development at the cost of nature is going to be very, very expensive for future generations. You know, I used to work in a bank, small thing, and I could sanction a loan which would make tons of money, and one day I'll be senior enough to say this was a bad loan and kick the guy in whose hands in 10 years' time the loan went bad. But I gave the loan. The same thing is happening in our country. Yeah. We will make money, rip forests, and, you know, get glory. And then we will stand in judgment on people who handle the mess 20 years down the line. Let our children understand that, because therein lies the future of our country. And if we hold 8% of the biodiversity of the world, and that 8% is very, very precious, because we are capable of holding on to it. Some countries are completely incapable. With that, I will throw this to the audience for questions.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, panel. It was such an enlightening discussion, especially the correlation of, how the pandemic actually came in because of something that we've done to the wilderness and to the wild. But something I wanted to ask is, especially us urban kids, we learned something you said, nature learning, right? The process of that for us is via two means, basically. One is through tourism, where we go and appreciate the aesthetics. And the other one is by buying things that are from the forest, like honey or other, forestry products. In one, it is very utilitarian, which is the forest products. And the other is just aesthetic, which we kind of shove aside when we are making more important decisions, so as to speak. So if we are worried about climate change and the bigger aspect, what kind of teaching, or what is the process of showing us that, or what is the way ahead where we can teach ourselves or our friends that, we should do so and so to make this change, or to prevent the apocalypse that is...
Bikram, may I ask this wonderful young lady to turn around so I can see her face? What a wonderful question. The camera is behind you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I just wanted to see, and I completely, absolutely love what you said.
I suggest, these two people will give you the better answer, but I suggest the cheap answer, which is any curiosity you have. Today, you are blessed. You have the internet. Any curiosity, please. I learned about Bhetki from the internet because the Australians wrote about it, because it means so much to them and they understand, they want to know the science. So please, and let those two people take this.
Now, almost every information is available on the internet without being very difficult. But Bittu, do answer her question.
No, I'll put it to you like this, that, the tales that were told by us, by our grandmothers, are actually tales that are told to village kids by their parents. They still live closer to nature. And I really honestly believe, Bikram, that the imperatives, the absolute imperative of not being able to do the wrong thing is going to go up. There is something, young lady, there is something called risk analysis. The insurance company premium is going to go up so high that the projects that are causing the destruction will not be able to operate. Whether it's a high dam, whether it's a nuclear reactor, whether it's all these various projects, there is a financial breakdown. Bikram, Sumit is a banker. I can tell you that they are in a state of panic right now, because the pandemic has caused one break. They're trying to push it up by exploiting nature even further. Right now, the laws are being reduced. But these kids that, like the young lady who spoke, they know what we are doing, my generation, and they will not forget. And I think that what you said, Sumit, the voting will definitely change. The patterns will change. Right now, we're at a cusp. You can't see it. It's still on the basis of you go 1 month before and give some laddus to somebody and they give you a vote. That's going to vanish. I promise you, because there is no water left in India. If a party wants to get a vote from an industrialist, he'll have to steal water from a farmer. And if he wants to give votes, gets votes, he'll have to steal water from an industrialist.
By the way, Calcutta just saw a report which says Calcutta is losing 1 foot of groundwater every year. Every year, 1 foot.
And the quality of the what remains is going down as well.
Yeah.
So good evening, everyone. It was a very wonderful session. So I wanted my question to specifically focus on this rural-urban divide. So as we have noticed that the rural areas have been facing a lot of climate wrath from time immemorial, but the urban population, like we privileged city kids, we have been mainly restricted to interactions on climate change through our schools, textbooks, something which is more theoretical and something which is not definitely connected to the natural roots. So do you think that the COVID pandemic has also been a great leveler in many senses? Because it has been more of a universal phenomena where, you know, even the urban scenario has changed so much and it has affected so many people that we are having this conversation and we are having this seminar for that fact itself. Because otherwise, you know, something like a storm is happening at the Sundarbans almost every year, but only when Amphan happens and it affects and destroys Kolkata that we city people are drawn even into the conversation. Or so, otherwise, it's something distant.
Bittu, do you have a take on whether the pandemic has made a difference to our information about climate change?
Yes, Bikram, the pandemic, while it may not have filtered down to the last village, the pandemic has done something. It has made world leaders much more humble than they were. It has made the promises come quicker and sharper and faster. It has made people understand that economics is threatened by the destruction of nature and that the pandemic has emerged from the destruction of species. This has never been heard from world leaders. They have never cared for species unless they put them into the zoo or they went out to shoot them in Africa. Today, they understand that the protection of species and the survival of the biodiversity of India, young man who you spoke, is the immune system of the planet. Now, this is something that has been understood by world leaders, but everybody is kicking the can to the future and saying, "Arey, aage dekho, up till 2070, 2080, 2090. One of the kids that attended our meeting asked somebody on the stage, "How old will you be in 2070? Of course, there was no answer. So I'm saying to you right now, we are engaged in intergenerational colonization and young people are angry. They're curious, Sumit, they're very curious, but they are very angry and we will not be remembered well and we still have time. We still have time because homeostasis, nature has the ability to heal itself. It can heal itself. The Sundarbans, all the mud that goes on is just going to keep growing higher and higher. The mangroves will probably survive long after Homo sapiens has survived.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, we'll conclude this session. Oh, there are questions. Oh my God.
My regards to all of you as eco-friends.
Last question.
And Mr. Bittu Sahgal is familiar to all of us for school projects, Kids for Tigers, some 10 years back.
Yes.
And I convey my regards to all of you. I've got some eco-friendly ideas, but I'm not very tech savvy. I wish to reach out to all of you in confidence. How could I do that? Could I have your contact cards, Mr. Sumit Sen? And convey my regards. Lots of love to Bittu ji. Wish you health.
A big hug back to you.
That child has a question. I want to take that question. Right, ask him. One last question. Sorry.
Good evening, sir. My name is Divya Malpani, and I've been writing poems since my childhood. I like being close to nature, and I visit my village every year, where I take care of the local animals like cows, sheep, goats, etc. I have also written many poems on nature, and I want to recite one of them.
Please, go ahead.
Funny side up. The seas reflect the sky so red, both boiling from indignation, mistreated, left uncared for, in this world of stagnation. As thick and grave as the problem is, one thing stands out as funny. We blame all things but ourselves, living in the shadow of irony. Life forms which once roamed the earth, now buried from the reach of sight. We try to bring back those ancient beasts, but do not preserve nature from this dreadful plight. We must preserve what still remains, close the void of extinction, to create a world so harmonious and break the wall of partition. Find the balance so pure and perfect, which prevents the fall of earth. Save it now, there's still much time. Grant all beings a,
Very good, great.
Bikram, I want you to get an autograph from this boy, which I would like you to send me. Because these children are speaking for tomorrow and they're also speaking for today. Congratulations.
and grant all beings a rebirth. Though one side is quite funny, our actions say a lot. Turn around, we still have time, else we'll fall in our own plot. Thank you.
Thank you. Very excellent, excellent.
And we can continue this conversation.
Thank you very
so
much,
Can we have
everybody.
a bigger round of applause for the speakers, please? Like louder. We move on to our next session. It is far more than a game, this cricket. Pradeep magazine discusses how cricket in India have changed and remained the same over the decades. In conversation with Rahul Bhattacharya, I will quickly introduce our speakers. Pradeep magazine is a cricket writer, columnist. He is the author of Not Quite Cricket that exposed the match-fixing scandal much before it surfaced in 2000. Rahul Bhattacharya is the author of a cricket travelogue, Pundits from Pakistan, and a novel, The Sly Company of People Who Care. He is an editor with ESPN Quick Info. I would like to welcome our speakers on stage. Can we have a round of applause for them? Can we please welcome them on stage with a round of applause?
A little bit.